coming.
Okay, thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. So, what is MSF, so Medicine Sans Frontières, doing for TB? So, we've been working, MSF has been working with TB for the last 25 years and have been slowly scaling up our programs. In the last probably last 10 years, we've begun to notice and work a lot more on patients with MDR-TB. And so we've treated, last year we treated 30,000 patients in 30 countries, or 29,000. But our MDR programs, we are scaling up, and we're now treating, so last year in 2012 we treated 1,700. The 2013 figures, we're looking at 2,500. And basically everywhere we look for MDR-TB, we find MDR-TB. So for example, in our former Soviet Union projects in Uzbekistan, we're finding that 40% of patients who present to us with TB for the first time, so not having had TB, known TB before, are presenting with MDR-TB. In Armenia, it's 30%. So this is what we're finding, that everywhere we look for MDR-TB, we find it. And so this is what I'm going to probably focus on a bit more today, is the DR-TB problem, because this is what we are finding as a sort of global organisation working in TB. This is a massive problem, and the complexity of MDR-TB, both in forms of how it's treated, how much it costs, and the issues that the patients have, are increasing. So, for example, it's not just, so drug-resistant TB is when it's resistant to isoniazid and rifampicin, the two key drugs that we use for treating drug-sensitive TB. In our Mumbai project, 50% of our MDR patients have fluoroquinolone resistance, so they're pre-XDR. So we're seeing the MDR epidemic evolving, so we're not dealing with it adequately now, and it's going to get worse. This is what we're finding, and this is why we find it really important that we need to get on top of this fast. So, why are we so concerned about MDR-TB? So, drug-sensitive TB, you've got 6 months of treatment, and the treatment, although it's long, if you're sensitive and you take it right, works. What are we looking at for MDR-TB? Well, the treatment takes 2 years. You need to have 8 months of injectable agents. The drugs that you take in this regimen, most of them are old, toxic, nasty drugs. And despite that, a cost of a regimen is between $4,000 and $6,000 US in a developing country. We're not talking about how much it costs in the UK, which is considerably more. This is, for our countries, South Africa, Swaziland, former Soviet Union countries. So you take your treatment for 2 years with these drugs that are going to make you go deaf, psychotic, nausea, vomiting, in a regimen that has, it's not actually ever been trialled. It's expert opinion. It's been put together. There's been no randomised control trials in this regimen. It's just, for a better want of it, a best guess. So what are you looking at? So we're looking at, within MSF, you take your treatment for 2 years, 53% success rate. Global success rate, we're better than the global success rate. Global success rate is 48. So, there's cancers with better outcomes than this. This is really severe. So, that's the MDR. What are we looking for XDR? There is really no idea of how to treat XDR. You put every drug that you can think of, even more toxic, even more unpleasant for the patient. And then what are you saying? 13% is our success rate. And this is an epidemic that is evolving. So this is why we really feel that we need to start making a bit of noise about this, because if this continues, we're all in big trouble, not just the countries where MSF works in. So, going back to the original, let's compare this to HIV. So there are some similarities, both TB and HIV. It's not a single drug. So we need a combination of drugs to treat, not a single pill on a single day. But with TB, we take a combination of drugs and we can have a cure. It is a curable illness. HIV is a combination to control, not to cure. In TB, we've had 2 new TB compounds approved in the last 40 years. And HIV, we've had 25 new drugs in 25 years. So they're doing a bit better than TB. Cost-wise, so for drug-sensitive TB, and these are numbers for the low-income countries, drug-sensitive TB treatment, it works. It's not ideal, but it does work, and it's affordable. So you're looking at $22 for treatment. MDR figures, you're looking at about $4,000 for a 2-year course of treatment, and anything beyond $7,000 for XDR, and the treatment tends to be until the patient dies or can't take it anymore or finally culture converts. You're looking at about 3 years if they can get it through treatment. And from the drug company point of view, how interested are they in TB? What's your market? And as Ibrahim nicely showed, there isn't there are cases in the rich world, but there's not a market. You're not going to, if you come out with a blockbuster TB drug, you're not going to be able, we don't think, and the drug companies I think agree, that you're not going to be able to say, right, we've got a mass market here who's ready to buy these drugs, let's invest, let's do the R&D. So for HIV, they've got more classes, so they've got the 25 new drugs. Now, their treatment costs, these are per patient per year, so obviously you're looking at a long-term chronic illness. So you're looking at, so there is actually, although the prices for the low-income countries have come down a lot, and I'll just talk about why that is in a moment, but there is a sort of income, a long-term income stream from whatever compounds you develop, and then in the developed world, there is a lucrative market. So for this example, TDF and 3DC in the NHS is about £12,000 per person per year. So, and then you've got to add in fabrons on top of that. So there is a market. There's a reason to commit your R&D teams to kind of looking for new drugs, getting them to market. And with regarding to the prices of HIV drugs, they were not always this nice for low-income countries. I'm not sure if people can remember back, but it used to be in South Africa that you couldn't get ARVs. It was thought that Africans couldn't take them. Those terrible terrible things went round about. Couldn't afford it, didn't need it. It was going to cause resistance because it wasn't going to be taken properly in Africa. This was then going to cause resistance and affect the US, and there was a lot of civil society anger about this. So to get the prices and the access to drugs to everyone who needed it for HIV, there was mass civil movements. So I've sort of split this into HIV protests on that side and TB protests on this. So the HIV, you had ACT UP, you had TAG, you had TAC, you had all these big organisations who fought not only for better access to treatment and more R&D in the US to find out what HIV was, how we're going to treat it, let's get some drugs going. You also had, we've got the drugs, everyone gets these drugs. And so there was mass movements in South Africa, in New York, in Washington, any of the big HIV conferences. People got angry, people up and got shouted at, went to board meetings of Big Pharma and made a lot of noise. What's happening in TB? Not a lot. Civil society in TB is not where civil society in HIV is, and there's many reasons behind this. Some of the ideas is that this is a curable illness, so people get TB, they take their treatment, they're cured, they're done, they're out of here. We're not going to stand up and fight. I don't really want anyone to know I've had TB, so why am I going to fight about it? People who are affected, there isn't the gays of San Francisco who are well educated, rich, and angry. They can make their voice heard. We're dealing with, in the European context, we're dealing with the bulk of our patients are either immigrants or in vulnerable populations who aren't able to stand up in Parliament and articulate their case. And then in the developing world, it's the stigma behind TB is massive. When I worked in Uganda, patients rather have HIV than TB. You know, there was more stigma attached to a curable illness than HIV. So no one wants to be known, and because of our lack of anger, lack of calling people to account that happened in HIV, I think is a big reason why. One of the many reasons, but a reason why we're not making the advances in TB, because no one's asking for it. There's a few voices, but there's not the embarrassing people in your shareholder meetings, people storming your parliament. We don't have that. So, but we need innovation. So we need a better regimen for MDR-TB. So we've sort of looked at what do we want, because we may not have it, but I think we should start stating what we want so people know. So we've got these new drugs, so let's use them. We want it to work in MDR. That's what MSF feels is a big neglected area, because the treatment for MDR doesn't work and it needs to be sorted out. We don't want lots of drugs, because this is what's happening, is we're just adding more and more drugs into this toxic cocktail. So we don't want an injectable agent. It's from the patient point of view, it's horrible, but from a programmatic scale-up, if you're dealing with needles and vials, no, it doesn't work. Simple dosing schedule, nice side effect profile. We don't want people to go mad or deaf or renal failure. We don't want to take a treatment for 2 years. Let's try and match the drug sensitive 6 months. We want it less, but let's go for 6 months now, and we want it to work with ARVs. So, is the drug pipeline going to get us there? So this is the global TB drug pipeline. And if you look back for 10 years, this is looking really good. The TB pipeline is, we've got some phase 3 compounds, we've got a couple of phase 2, we've got 4 new classes of drug, 2 new drugs registered. Oh, nothing in phase 1. Oops. And then early stage development. And especially if this is the valley of death, where you're going to lose a lot of your compounds. Is that what we're looking for? Well, let's compare to other, maybe it's a tough thing. So, Hep C, what have we got? 15 compounds in phase 1, 14 phase 2, 11 new compounds in phase 3. Oops, looking even worse. And then, so HIV, so 25 new compounds in 25 years. Currently, in the last 10 years, HIV has had 47 new drugs go through phase 2 and phase 3 trials, and 34 of those have been approved by the FDA within 10 years. So, although the TB pipeline looks good in the history of TB, if we compare it to others, illnesses that are affecting similar populations, we've nothing to be proud about, and in fact we've probably got quite a bit to be scared about. And we don't need new drugs, actually. Well, we do, but we've just already talked about it. TB's not a one drug, one pill we're treating. It needs a regimen. So what we've happened now is we've got 2 new drugs for TB. One was approved by the FDA in 2012 and the other by the EMA just at Christmas time. We don't know, we don't know how to use them. They've not been combined. They've just been added into the current regimen as it is. So they haven't changed anything yet, because we've got these new drugs, but we haven't developed them. Or at least MSF feels we haven't developed them right. We've put them in, but we don't know. We haven't improved the regimen for anyone. We haven't made it shorter. We haven't looked at if combining them can really do something radical. We just add them in to another set of side effects on top of the existing side effects. And we know that regimen doesn't really work. So why are we adding in our brand new drugs that potentially TB's never seen before? We're going to get a better, to a regimen that people are already building up resistance to. We're going to, if we're not careful, we're going to lose the power of these drugs before we know how to use them. And then our pipeline shows what comes next. We don't have a rich pipeline to be careless about how we use the first 2 drugs we've had in over 50 years, over 40 years, and these drugs are expensive. So they're not, the bedaquiline so bedaquiline is the one that we know the prices of. For a low-income country, it's $900 US For a middle-income country, it's 3,000, and for us here in the UK, it's going to be 30,000 for a course. So we've not changed any of the paradigm here at all. So MDR, TB, MSF feels is in crisis. For, with 2 new drugs, no new regimen. There are clinical trials, and there's a lot of STREAM trial, which the MRC is doing, which is, I think, a really interesting trial, and thinking really dynamically about changing the regimen. So the STREAM trial, for those who don't know, is looking at a 9-month course of treatment for MDR TB. It's not using the current, and it's underway, it's a phase 3 RCT. Currently it's not using any new drugs, it's just using old drugs in new ways and managing to bring the duration down. Still has an injectable agent in it. But it's halfway there, and there's ways of looking to see how this will develop. Marvel and Nick's trial are 2 planned studies combining more than one set of the new drugs further back in the pipeline for a shorter 6-month or 4-month MDR TB regimen. So they look very exciting, but they're in the planning stage. They haven't got underway. So what we're looking at is that new drugs and new regimens, by the time the current clinical trial process goes on, we're looking at 2020, 2022 for any results and impact of this to come. And as I pointed out, we feel that there's a massive need now, and we can't wait another 10 years. We have high prices, no price transparency, and TB is underinvested. Going back to, again, also the political will needs to be there, and the lack of civil society means that governments can get away with murder when it comes to MDR. So we feel that they all have to have an MDR programme. The Global Fund provides most of the funding for MDR TB, and its funding is being cut back, it's changing how it's funding its programmes. TB funding is actually taking a cut in the Global Fund. This has a huge knock-on effect on any MDR programmes. Lack of R&D. So the funding needs, only 31% was met in 2010 for drug development, same for diagnostics. Funding for diagnosis and treatment of MDR is way less than it needs to be, and there's a funding gap of 94 million for high burden countries to treat MDR. So we're way behind, and there's not the will. The governments, I don't think, are quite, the high burden governments aren't ready to address this yet, and it's because they're not being asked to, like they were in HIV. So this is just another kind of outline of what we're looking at funding wise for what NIH funds for diseases and the Global Fund spending. What I want to be really clear about is that this isn't to become, let's take away from HIV. That's not what this is about. We need to match HIV. We don't want to move the donors away from HIV, because TB and HIV work together. The organisms themselves are making a powerful combination. TB makes your HIV worse, HIV makes your TB worse. We think that TB and HIV, when it comes to R&D, need to be as closely matched as the organisms are, and not take away from each other, but contribute and complement. This is again just showing the funding gaps of what we need, what we've got, and we're behind in everything. TB. And it's getting worse, unfortunately. So the private sector has decreased its TB R&D funding. Pfizer had a TB compound that it didn't prioritise, sat on the shelf for 9 years. They finally sold it on to a new company, but they sold it on to a very small company that may not have the capacity to develop it further. So they've withdrawn from all anti-infectives, including TB. AstraZeneca, who has a phase 2A TB compound, it announced at the beginning of the year that it is withdrawing from the anti-infective NTD R&D sphere. It has committed to continue the development of its drug, but is not doing anything more. There's no other work going on. Otsuka is a Japanese company who's got one of the new drugs that has just been registered at the beginning of the year. Their They're committed to fund the phase 3 trial, but their early drug work in TB is being scaled back. We don't know what Johnson & Johnson are doing, but again, it looks like they're scaling back their early R&D work. So we're in big trouble. Private sector are leaving TB R&D, and we need to change this dynamic. So it's time for TB to follow HIV and do something new. Let's spice up. So this is something I'm going to introduce, a little idea that MSF has been working on with a number of key partners of changing how TB R&D is done so that we're not in this situation that we're in now. We change it because it's blatantly showing the current system does not work. So there's been a lot of work behind global R&D work, and there's this WHO framework looking at changing the R&D. It's been acknowledged that R&D is not matching the global health needs, and that neglected diseases are falling behind, and TB is in that pot of neglected diseases. So there is a WHO framework going on to look and see if there can be some form of global R&D fund to help investment in the neglected diseases. And as part of that process, MSF have been working on putting together an idea of a framework of changing how TB R&D is done in light of some of the ideas that have been generated through this bigger think tank process. And we've come up with something called the 3P project, push, pull, pool, to promote TB R&D. And what this is doing is changing the whole way. So TB, stopping the fact that you need to have a profitable market to invest in R&D, because TB, malaria, schistosomiasis, sleeping sickness, they all lose out on that, and no one gets to development. So what we want is that we want to change how it's funded and move away from how much you can charge for your drug at the end being what you want, but pay for it throughout the whole process. So set up a fund that people pay into, and we also want the BRICS countries to pay into, because BRICS countries make up 60% of the MDR burden, but they make up less than 1% of the TB R&D investment. And I know they've got many things, but we feel that they can begin to contribute more. So this is not just asking donor, like rich countries, to pay. This is a bigger framework than that. But looking at awarding grants and milestone prizes to early compounds. So compounds that are in preclinical development that need funds to complete that, do their GLP talks, get their IND. Give them funded, because there's a bit of a gap of early science is funded. There's grants for clinical trials, but there's a bit of a gap in the middle of, well, how do we get from early to from the lab to humans, and how we're going to, so that needs funded. So you do small prizes and grants for that, and that's for single compounds, and then for clinical, and then when it gets to phase 1 and phase 2, using some grants but milestone prizes. So if you get your compound to phase 1, you can get a milestone prize. If you get your compound, but then from about phase 1 onwards, no prizes for single drugs. We're not interested in that. You'll only be eligible for milestone prizes or grants if you're doing regimen development. So we want, at this stage, to stop this single silo of let's develop a drug and then hand it to the world and no one knows how to use it. Go back further. And so then from phase 1 onwards, it's regimen development. But so that's kind of a bit of pooling funds for grants and grants and milestone prizes. But that's not addressed the issue of an affordable regimen at the end. So to be eligible for these, you have to pool your IP into a sort of medicines, like a patent pool, at all stages. So what that means is that you may have organisations that don't have a compound, but have an interest in doing clinical trials and regimens, and then they're able to get access to the products in the pool for a fee, which then goes into sort of the continuation of this, to then expedite regimen development. And then what we hope happens is that you get a regimen that has been fully funded prior to the registration. That means that you don't need to recoup your costs. You charge at price. And you don't have to do this tiered pricing where one country gets a better price than another, and London or England ends up paying for a cheaper regimen. Everyone gets the same price at the end because it's all been funded throughout. So this is sort of and it's new and it's innovative, and we think it's time that TV joined HIV and did innovative stuff. So we feel that this, innovation is the way forward to beating what the increasing MDR epidemic. And this is Fumeza, who beat her ex-DR TB. She was on treatment for 2.5 years. And at one stage, we really thought she wasn't going to make it, and we prepared her for dying. But we carried on and persevered, and that's what I feel that we need to do in TB, is that we're in a dark phase. We need to carry on, and we will come out the other end. And if you want to support Fumeza and other of our DRTB patients who are calling for change, so this is our patients are calling out saying, look, we want tested, we want treated, and we want treatment that works, and we want treatment. So there's a manifesto that MSF has been supporting our patients to write, and we will be handing it over at the WHO, the World Health Assembly in May, where the post-2015 global TB targets are set. And be really appreciative if you could sign up to show your support and spread the word to others to really get some of this society anger.